In the grim dark future of Warhammer 40,000, only war and pestilence remain. And of course, this guy, the Meat Mage, found in the Space Marine Heroes Season 3 set. And they are my absolute favourite Nurgle sculpts. So let's finish building my one and only and send him to get primed. But before we start with all the fun, let's get that diorama built. For the base we are using my newly acquired MDF circles and some lovely XPS foam. And to get this bad boy cut into shape, we're heading outside to use the hot wire cutter, as he is the only thing that cuts straight. And with all my concentration, I try to cut as close to the MDF as possible and start to shape this monstrosity. And as you've seen from the thumbnail, today's diorama is taking place in a not so normal swamp. So after grabbing my clippers, it's time to cut a small inverted dome into the diorama. Now I can imagine there could be an easier way to do this. I haven't found one yet though. And to make sure our future resin doesn't spill out everywhere, I'm using a scalpel knife or an art knife to slowly cut around the edges for a nice smooth round circle. So let's refill our energy and get ready for clay time. To build up the diorama, we are going to be using air drying clay, which allows me to dry the clay without setting fire to all that foam. Also, with the clay we can now fill in the gap between the MDF and the foam, using some water to smooth everything out. With the clay now dry, we can turn this barren landscape into a sparse landscape, with some resin reeds I found in my bits box. So I wanted this diorama to be a continuation of my past Death Guard themed diorama, so I got some Space Marine Scouts that I'm going to cut in half and use his torso to stick out the water, aiming to fight our mighty Meat Mage. And using the other half of his chest, I flipped it over and made it look like another body in the water. And with the bulk of the diorama now done, let's prime it so we can get ready for painting. For all of the reeds, I painted them in a standard green, which led us to painting some of the Imperial Fists, which is the chapter I chose for today. And of course we're painting them in Imperial Fists yellow contrast paint, which I might say is the best yellow I've ever used when using it over white. For the belt, or really any leather, I painted it in thinned down Rhinox hide, as I really wasn't too bothered about any detail on most of the miniatures, as they'll be submerged in resin later on. Next, we paint all of the metallics in my favourite paint, black metal. And we can get ready to paint his insignia and hair in petroleum grey. For his face, I chose Cadian flesh tone and highlighted it up with basic skin tone. Finally, we can add some more basic skin tone into the grey mix to add some nice grey highlights onto the insignia and his hair. And finally we are adding a dark brown enamel wash, which is a nice cheat to make our models look like we spent more time on it, when in fact it's been about 10 minutes. And after about 5 minutes waiting for it to dry, it's time to remove the wash with some odorless spirits. With the diorama now more or less painted, let's head over back to our Meat Mage, and to start we are going to dry brush him in Vallejo's Desert Yellow. Just before we switch to English uniform, where we dry brush again but focusing on the middle parts of the armour. I'd say this is more like a medium dry brush, before we finally finish up the armour with a very light dry brush of Ogryn camo. So with the armour now done, it's time to paint all of the trim in decayed metal. A lovely bronzy colour that will make him really fit into his thousands of year old armour. One thing I really have to do though is just to make sure I don't spill over onto any of that green armour. And for all of the metallics, just like the Space Marine, I am going to be using black metal for all the silver, and next we are going to start edge highlighting all of that decayed metal in Elven Gold. Now, using blood red, I'm going to paint, guess what, all the blood. Our hero is turning this river of blood into flies, hoping to spread the gift of Nurgle. Now for a staff, I used Gobi Brown, and slowly added basic skin tone into the mix to add more highlights, and I did this for about 3 stages. I quite like this for the wood tone. And for all of the maggots, guess what, I also used basic skin tone. To make this look a bit more gross, I then added a glaze of blood for the blood gods for all over the miniature. And when it came to painting his hood, I used the same steps as the staff, except I didn't highlight quite as brightly. To add some more shadow into the miniature, I decided not to use enamels, and instead I went back to the basics with some Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade, using all of the metallics and the wooden staff. And after all that shading, I painted the flies, so let's finally get back to that diorama. Before we begin our resin pour, we need to paint the bottom of the diorama, basically the water. So that this white doesn't shine through, I decided to paint it all black first, before adding a layer of brown to resemble the dirt beneath the water. So after gluing our mage down, it's time to pour the resin. After measuring out equal parts of resin, I poured some blood red in, as well as some Rhinox hide, except it really didn't mix well. So I started from the beginning again, and this time I just used blood red. To get this resin onto the diorama, I used a pipette, as this gives me as much control as I need to make sure it doesn't get over all of those miniatures. Now, one of my biggest worries when doing a resin pour is it leaking out all over the sides. So for this, I just did it really slowly, and even I waited 10 minutes longer than I should have when I poured the resin so it'd be a bit thicker. A day later, it was dry, and I grabbed my high gloss gel and sketched it in ripples and generally disturbed water patterns. I thought it would also be a good idea to cover the marine in it as well, as I'm sure he got dunked in it when it first happened. I decided not to paint him red as maybe he should be, but maybe we'll come back to this another time. And there it is, our finally finished diorama. If you enjoyed this episode, maybe click on this video below, it is just as good. And as always, like and subscribe. I've been Reese, and I'll catch you in the next episode. See ya!